In late medieval Europe, the emergence of cities and the growth in commerce shook the foundations of feudal serfdom. The cities tended to develop on land owned by the aristocracy. Therefore, it was the secular powers who held sway there. However, the religious authorities resented this dominance and often stirred up disputes.
因为西欧啊，它是教权和属权，它是二元的啊，它是两个系统。当然，他们既相互联合，同时呢又相互制约、相互斗争啊。当然，基督教会或者说天主教会，它本身是中世纪最大的封建主，它和世俗贵族之间有着封建权益的争夺。
In Tibet, by contrast, since the middle of the 17th century, the Dalai Lama was with the support of the Qing Empire, both the religious head and the secular leader.
神权和政权的相结合的程度上，那是远远不如西藏。西藏不是个结合的问题，它是政教合一、合二为一，也就是说，宗教和政治是合在一起。
In his book, The Unveiling of Lhasa, Daily Mail reporter Edmund Chandler recorded his impressions of Tibet. He wrote, "There's no doubt that the Lamas employ spiritual terrorism to maintain their influence and preserve the temporal government in their hands."
这几个大的寺庙呢，也有很多子寺。那么他们这三大寺是，在这个前藏地区的比较重要的格鲁派的寺庙。这样以后呢，不仅是大量的僧人的出现，它这个母寺里头，而且它有大量的子寺，子寺呢遍布了整个西藏的各个角落。
The core feature of the Tibetan system in which religion and politics were combined was that the Dalai Lama enjoyed absolute power in both the religious and the secular worlds. In addition, many of the monks played influential roles at different levels of government.
我觉得跟欧洲不一样的最大的就是说是咱们这边表现的最残酷的一种东西，它的这种剥削是建立在一种精神的控制上，因为 你经世要有一点反抗情绪，或者说类似于有一些不满的情绪，你可能会来世还得要受到那个摧残。那么为了修到好的来世，你就要讲究的一种恪守本位吧。那么就说贵族就是贵族，领主就是领主，那么就说是你奴隶、农奴这些，那你就是钱是注定的。
In fact, in the modern history of Tibet, there were attempts at reform. For example, there was an effort to build a modern army and schools based on the British model. However, interference by the monk class meant that all these attempts ended in failure. A noble called Long Sha, who proposed reforms, was punished by having his eyes gouged out.
近1000年，西藏的传统社会之所以没有自身发生变革，没有自身发生现代化的变化，其中一个重要原因，一是它的环境四周封闭、长期封闭；二，它的意识形态的根深蒂固的宗教的这种意识；第三呢，这种法律制度以宗教为依据制定的法律为它服务。
Half a century ago, the famous American Tibetologist Melvin C. Goldstein wrote in his book, A History of Modern Tibet, it's precisely because the religious leaders control political power that Tibet lost the ability to adjust to the changing environment and situation. On the European continent in the late Middle Ages, the developed transport system facilitated commodity circulation. The feudal aristocracy was attracted by the new commodities coming from all over the world. If they wanted to buy these commodities, they needed money rather than free labor, so they give their serfs the opportunity to earn money and subsequently buy their freedom. Gradually, the system of feudal serfdom collapsed. Meanwhile, on the Tibetan plateau, the serf owners in their closed environment could not see the beauty of the outside world, so there was no movement for change. Tibet's unique situation meant the conditions did not exist for revolution. An external force would be needed to provide the impetus. In Washington, the U.S. Capitol, opposite the Washington Monument, stands the Lincoln Memorial. It commemorates Abraham Lincoln, who is widely acclaimed as the man who freed the slaves. There was a time when the white-owned plantations of the American South were covered with black slaves trafficked from Africa. This was an obvious violation of the statement in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. The American Civil War broke out in 1861. The armies of the North, fighting under the anti-slavery banner, triumphed, and the President Lincoln declared the abolition of slavery. Thus, America's black slaves gained their freedom.
And it laid the groundwork, I think, for the emergence of the United States as the world's most powerful nation in the 20th century. That would not have happened if the United States had divided into two or more countries in 1860, or if the North had lost the Civil War. So it affected the entire future of the United States.
The American Civil War was the climax of a worldwide abolition movement. Since the beginning of the 19th century, other countries had one by one been outlawing slavery as a violation of human dignity. The British government banned the slave trade in 1807 and outlawed slavery in 1833. The French government outlawed slavery and the slave trade in 1848. In Prussia, the government passed the October Edict in 1807, which broke the relations of ownership between master and serf. In 1861, the Russian government adopted the Emancipation Manifesto, by which the country's serfs gained their freedom. By the end of the 19th century, countries across the Americas had outlawed slavery.
谁能最早废除农奴制，那里的生产就得到较快发展，人民的生活水平就能得到较快提高。这可以讲从最早的西欧，经济文化最发达地区，到最后的东欧，可以讲是无一例外的。
With the abolition of slavery, human society entered a brilliant new era of progress. Nobody wanted to return to the darkness of the past.
Au Moyen Âge, j'aurais été un serf. Je ne peux pas évidemment être nostalgique d'une époque à laquelle j'aurais eu une vie qui aurait été celle d'un serf. Non, certainement pas. Parce que ce serait aberrant, et c'est clair que le servage, demandé à n'importe quel Européen, que ce soit le servage ou l'esclavage, sous quelque forme que ce soit, il sera contre.
Tibet maintained the entire system of feudal serfdom until the early 1950s. The serfs were in no position to improve industrial technology because all the social wealth was consumed by the monasteries. As for agriculture, crop yields were often only 10 times the weight of the original seeds. As a result, Tibetan society was on the verge of collapse.
这个制度已经到了一种腐朽的，也可以说是静止的，也可以说是僵化的、不变的。 这么一个边缘，正如我形容的，是一个非常相当于一个骨瘦如柴的一个人吧，几乎没有气的这么一个人，头上戴着金碧辉煌的这个藏传佛教的哲学和寺院，啊，艺术甚至艺术，全世界都关注西藏辉煌的艺术，啊，辉煌的这个佛教哲学，是这个没错。 但是背他的来创造他的这个，都是饥寒交迫的，啊，骨瘦如柴的，是吧？没有人身自由的，近百万的农奴承担了这一切。
Serfdom was abolished in Tibet following the peaceful liberation in 1951. Across the Tibetan plateau, people greeted a new dawn of history. Yet the upper classes, intent on protecting their vested interests, refused to accept any change to the status quo.
我们知道，因为20世纪那个60年代，这个美国人要开始往月亮发展了，而西藏的社会制度还是在这个封建农奴制度之下呀，是逆历史潮流的，是不符合人类发展的，更不符合西藏人民的利益。
In 1959, Tibet's serf owners launched an armed rebellion against democratic reform. The People's Liberation Army put the rebellion down in a very short time. Premier Zhou Enlai subsequently issued an order declaring that the local Tibetan government had been dismissed as of March the 28th, 1959. That day is remembered as the watershed between old and new Tibet. A democratic reform campaign was soon in full swing. The liberated serfs received certificates granting them ownership of their own land. They were given the essential tools of production, such as farming implements and livestock. And having just been granted their freedom, they soon learned to exercise their political rights. In September 1961, the first ever democratic elections were held in Tibet. The illiterate former serfs used beans to vote for their preferred candidates. Thus was the First People's Congress of the Tibet Autonomous Region elected. On September 1st, 1965, the First People's Government of the Tibet Autonomous Region was established, and the former serfs became the masters of the new Tibet. Tserring Lamo, a deputy to the First People's Congress of Tibet, had been a Nangzan, the name given by the owners to their household serfs. During the democratic reform, many mutual aid teams had been set up, but as the Nangzan could only do housework and had no experience of farm work, nobody wanted to accept them into their teams. So Tserring Lamo organized a team made up exclusively of Nangzan.
Rani tobu imbe rugo takudi ya tanje rani jeba tanje kanche ta ninga stigedin zu jeje ane nimbayina misu nyes legji de ngandre legji bo gongwe misu nyesu ja de ngandre ane chen chi je lusa je ganga mi gange gebal keje nda simje mebo gebal orje lu to tije daga na shengen da menzu cha shabena songge gubju ko sumelo ja kale khakba ine ngandre nyenzu lushu phata 미수 멤버 옆에서 툴레제 제제 지리제제 딘데젠다 싱그다 마선네 떡제 딘데 종송.
In the harvest season, the Nangzan Mutual Aid Team achieved a miracle by recording the highest productivity among 21 local teams. Tserring Lamo and her colleagues demonstrated through their hard work that the liberated serfs could generate a vast amount of energy with their enthusiasm.
也正是由于这一次伟大的民主改革，使得西藏的这个生产力得到了彻底的解放，翻身农奴迸发出来的这种热情，使得他们在半个世纪以来，这个经历了一次又一次的社会进步。
Tibet's democratic reform emancipated more than 1 million serfs and made them free citizens. They acquired their own homes, proper jobs, and their dignity. In Tibet, where over 1 million people lived on the territory of 1 million square kilometers, the final curtain was brought down on the world's last system of feudal serfdom. Tibet's democratic reform, which ranks alongside the abolition movement of any country in the world, wrote a brilliant page in the history of human emancipation.